I'm attorney Phil Jusino, and this is Finding Common Ground here on Altice Channel 115. You can see the show every Saturday on Channel 115 at 10 a.m. You can also see the show on YouTube by going to my YouTube channel, Phil Jusino. Got a great show planned for today. We got two special guests, Ann Marie Alletto. We're going to talk about getting New York children back into school by September. Kindergarten, elementary school, junior high, high school, public schools, getting our kids back to school. Last week we had two guests from the organization called Parents and Teachers Against Distance Learning, and this is a follow-up to that segment. We also have Ed Vilbig, Ed from Atlanta, my national correspondent, and we're going to talk about Governor Kemp from Georgia, brought in the National Guard to Atlanta and declared a national emergency. So let's get to it. Ann Marie is my first guest. Ann Marie, how are you?
How are you? Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first off, I'm a concerned parent that, of course, has a child, and I'm very concerned about the children returning to school. I am a nurse. I've worked in healthcare for more than 25 years, and I have a very varied background, and I have, I have a lot of different skills that I do. But mainly my career has been in healthcare.
I see. And how many children do you have?
I have one child.
And how old is that child?
She's 13.
And what grade will she be going into next year?
She will be going into high school.
Okay, and if you don't mind me asking, what school district are you in?
Smithtown.
Okay. I went to Smithtown West and I graduated back in 1982. Now, your daughter has been doing distance learning. How has that been going?
Well, it's been going pretty well because she, she's in private schools, so they've done it differently than the public sector. My nieces and nephews are in the public schools, and they've had a different type of learning. In the private sector, they seem to be doing many more hours of education and Google Meets and projects, so she did have a lot of detailed work during this process and this distance learning.
When did she start doing the distance learning? And was it March or April when they were no longer going to school? When was that?
Right. So as of March 13th, that was her last day attending school. On March 16th, the school took a one-day latitude. March 17th, they began with the distance learning.
I see.
They were pretty quickly in the private sector to jump right into the distance learning.
Got it. And what was her last day of school?
Her last day of school was June 10th.
All right. Now, you said she goes to private school. I guess there was more instructions, and it's still the same kind of learning. You're sitting in front of a computer, correct?
Right.
And how many hours a day on average was she doing work with the school?
Okay, so the work would be anywhere from 6 to 8 hours a day, the amount of assignments they would get. So they were getting a lot of assignments, compared to her cousins who were in public school in actually Nassau County, and she has cousins in Suffolk County, and they were getting about an hour to 2 hours a couple times a week of a Google Meets, but they were not getting the amount of work that she was getting. So I have to tell you, in the private, I found that they were definitely more engaging and they were teaching new curriculum. What I was learning from my sister-in-law and her cousins is that they were not learning new curriculum. So it was definitely a different type of learning. That I was very pleased with. But however, though, there are many other issues, not just the learning, but also the psychological, impact that they're facing because they're not able to work, to interact with other children, their friends. They're not able to communicate other than via a text or, a FaceTime or anything like that. Everything, of course, is electronic and nothing's in person. And this is so important and crucial in this, pubescent years of 13, 14, 15,
Absolutely.
Even a little bit younger. They have to be able to migrate together and be able to know how to, speak to other children, know how to interact with other children, know how to interact with the teachers, and if there was questions or concerns, it was a trying period. They had to go back and forth via emails, or they had to go to text. It was not very simple to actually stick up your hand and say, "I have a question."
Right. Now, how did you get involved in this issue to decide,
Well,
I'm going to be proactive and do
enough,
something?
well, it's like, interestingly enough, I have many friends that are teachers in the public sector,
Right.
as well as I have my cousin is also works in a school district, and they're all coming to me saying, we want to go back, we want to go back. And I said, well, is this not going to happen? Is this going to, and it was starting to concern me. Now, to be honest with you, when it started in March, I'm like, okay, Easter, we'll go back to Easter. Like, they kept, it was like being a kicker on the football team, right? They first say, I got to kick the ball 10 yards, and then every week they moved it 10 more yards. So by the time we got towards Easter, I was kicking the ball, 60 yards. So it was a little frustrating for me, but I kept saying, okay, we'll get there and we'll be able to go back. And then we'll get to this, we'll hit these pinnacles, and then we'll be able to return to school. And this is all, of course, going on. Well, we've had the outbreak of cases, and then we also had the deaths. And, Governor Cuomo was like, no, we're not going to go forward with the schools. And I could understand where they were coming from. They were very concerned. What I'm having a problem with is that the children are low risk. So on May 8th, I decided to write a letter. And because we were just there was no indication that they were returning to school this year. And every time the governor was questioned about what about the fall, well, we'll see when we get there, or we'll make a decision now. He says July 13th, but we're many weeks away. But there has to be a preparation, and it's almost like they're preparing us for them not returning.
Right.
So on May 8th, I decided to take a proactive approach, and I am not a shy person. So I reached out to Suffolk County Legislator Balone. I wrote a letter to the governor, the New York State Department of Education, Congressman Zeldin. I reached out to Assemblyman Fitzpatrick, also to Senator Flanagan, as well as reaching out to the Smithtown superintendent, and also to the Diocese of Rockville Center,
Right.
to Dr. Walsh. And I wrote this letter basically saying, what about our children? I understand where your concerns are, and, yes, coronavirus can be contagious, and yes, we're seeing the deaths, but the children are very low risk. And my point to them was, we've been sending kids to school during the Spanish flu. They still went to school. They went to school during the '69 flu. They went to school during H1N1, and they go to school every year during the flu season, of which the influenza causes more deaths in children than coronavirus.
Right.
So how come we cannot have them return to school now that we have coronavirus? Why is this such an issue?
Did you get a response?
No response. I did not hear. Only one who responded to me was Assemblyman Fitzpatrick. He took the time to respond to me, and I deeply appreciate him because he listened to my concerns. He was concerned with what his constituents have to say.
What did he say to you?
So he said, that they are fighting for them to go back to school. We have to continue, we have to continue to have our voice be heard, because, didn't know if this was going to happen come September. We knew it was going to happen by the end of June, but we did not know if it was going to happen by September. So he encouraged me to continue voicing my concerns amongst the legislation, whether it's Balone or Como or any one of them, to try to get some attention put on this.
And
Go ahead.
Now, let me ask you this. Now, how confident are you that our children, New York children, we're focusing on New York, are going to be in the classroom after Labor Day this year?
Right now I'm 60-40. So I think 60% is possible, or 40% is not possible. However, though, there's a couple things that have happened since my letter on May 8th. There was a bill that has gone out to the New York State, through the New York State Education,
Right.
and they were asking for funding, $19.9 million, to reimagine our education system.
Right.
And what that talks about in that bill is that this amendment, they want to take the education and basically increase the virtual. So whether your children go to school 2 days a week or 3 days a week. So I have several concerns around that. Why does it cost $19.9 million to reimagine our education for an education system that was working, first of all? Second of all, why would it be more money to reimagine it from a distance? And it doesn't, it's going to increase our taxes. It's going to lessen our children having face-to-face learning. And what does the full-time parent who is working do when,
Right, exactly.
my child is of age that doesn't need daycare, but what about those who do? Is the state going to reimburse us for the daycare?
Probably not.
Right. So I wrote a letter again on July 1st because what my concern is that on June 26th, the American Academy of Pediatricians published the following, that schools and states develop plans for students to return to school during COVID-19 pandemic. They're saying that the planning considerations and guidance for school reentry, that they should go back to school for instruction, face-to-face instruction, for the importance of social and emotional skills, safety, nutrition, physical activity, and mental health therapy. And this is a generation that is going to be basically, in my mind, left behind if we do not return these children to school. And it's going to be the damage is going to be far more than we understand, especially the mental health and the psychological impact on our children. And I think that we're going to be raising children that will not know how to interact with other children. And when they are faced to go out in the world and have to interact with them, they'll become nervous. They're not going to be sure. They're not, even with my daughter, I actually was able to get her into a camp program. So she was nervous returning because she hasn't interacted with kids in 3 months.
She's 13 years old, correct?
Yeah, she's 13.
Okay. I want to read a quote that I had read last week, but I think it's important. And this is Governor Cuomo said, the old model, and he uses the word old, the old model of everybody goes and sits in a classroom, and the teacher is in the front of the classroom and teaches the class, and you do that all across the city, all across the state, all these buildings, all these physical classrooms. Why? With all this technology you have. So it sounds like to me, he's gearing up to keep this in place more permanently to save money. Because think about it. If you have virtual learning, you don't have to have a school nurse. You don't have to have a janitor. You can cut down on electricity. You may not have to have a librarian. There's a lot of money that can be saved. And I know that Bill Gates and Melinda Gates, that foundation, is really leaning toward virtual classrooms as opposed to kids going in the classroom. But like you said, it's not just the learning. People can learn in many different ways. It's the socialization. You have a kid who's 13, 14, 15. They need that. They talk to their friends at lunchtime. They interact with a teacher. They talk to the kids in the classroom. They have a problem, they can go to that teacher. If a child is being abused at home or not being treated properly, a teacher can pick that up who happens to be a mandated reporter. These are a whole host of issues that are very, very important that I think fall short when we do virtual learning. What is your take on that?
I totally 100% agree. And my original letter to Governor Cuomo on May 8th was exactly about that point, because he mentioned early on that he wanted Bill Gates and Melinda Gates to get involved. Right. Well, I don't know if everyone is aware of this, but they were responsible for the Common Core.
Exactly.
And we know what a disaster that has been to our students, to our children. And I expressed concern of that situation, of that instance in my letter to Governor Cuomo. And I said, we do not need the Gates involved in our education. We are more than capable. We are paying top dollar for our kids to go to school. I mean, for myself, I'm paying school taxes and I also pay private school, correct? So I'm getting double billed, but it's my choice.
Sure.
So my point is that if you're telling me that we're one of the best educations in the state of the union, right, of out of the 50 states, we're one of the best, well then I want in return to see that. And I have concern with the Gates getting involved in our education, where Bill Gates I know he is a billionaire and he has plenty of money, and I understand that, but he's not a proponent of in-person learning. He's more of distance learning. It's something that
Yes.
they have always pushed. I do not agree with that. And I know that Governor Cuomo, what I've learned from everything I could find out about the state and where we're at, I think we're financially in a situation. And of course, what's the best way to cut our costs, because our healthcare costs have cost so much during this pandemic, is to cut our schools. But as a taxpayer, we have been paying these taxes, and they should have been allocated for the schools. So there should be no problem with our tax money that we're allocated for the schools, that we should be able to open the schools, unless that tax money was allocated towards healthcare or moved around, and there might not be any more. This is something that would have to be looked into. But this is my concern, is that I would not like the Gates to be involved in our education. I would like to be in person. I did point out to Governor Cuomo, who has 3 children. I'm sure that they did not want, his 3 children would not want to spend from kindergarten to 12th grade sitting in the house distance learning.
No,
I do not know any child that has said that. My child and many children I've spoken to, and she has many cousins, my daughter, they want to go back to school. They want to be with their friends. They don't want to be with their parents. And for many of us, we're working parents, so they're not with anybody.
Right.
They're home alone.
Do you see a role for distance learning? I know you want the kids to go back to school. I think we all do. But do you see a role for distance learning in the future?
Well, I think that you could possibly integrate some of it, but I'll tell you what they do lose out on. It's not the same, and then some. Let me tell you what is happening with most of the children. They wouldn't get up to like 11, 12 o'clock because it wasn't that routine. They would then show up at the Google Meets or not show up. So many of my friends who are teachers, and including in my daughter's school, maybe 50% showed up. The other 50% never attended.
Was there attendance
Sometimes
taken?
5. Yes, there was attendance taken.
But
So
they would not show up.
Not show up, or even for, my daughter's cousins, like they would say, like, oh, we get up at 11, we get up at 12, we'll go to the class, or it's recorded, and we'll then check in later. Or you have the children doing the work 8, 9 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you
So
see?
there's no structure.
Okay. Now, what do you see the end game here? Now, I know when I had the show last week, they were saying mid-July, I think July 13, we're going to get some more information from the governor.
Right.
What have you been hearing as to when the next, let's say, milestone, for lack of a better term, when you're going to hear something that may give you some further direction as to where New York State is going?
I think that it's going to be around the July 13th. And I do think that I am not confident that our governor has enough money to open the schools. So what I've heard from a friend of mine who lives in the city, she got a survey that asked if she would like her children to go to school Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Tuesday and Thursday, or totally 100% virtual. Now, she has children that are 6 and 8 years old. So that they're not giving, only options they're giving for face-to-face is either Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday.
Right.
And it possibly will be a half day because they want to split up the classrooms.
Well, let me ask you this, Ann Marie. Is that a compromise that you could live with? Now, look, we don't have a vaccine yet. And I understand that children aren't at risk the same way an 80-year-old is or somebody that's infirmed. But to start the school year, is that a compromise that you could live with, where the kids go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday? Is that something you could embrace?
It's something I would embrace temporarily, but I would not want it on a regular basis, because then my child will be home by herself most of the time because I work full time.
Right. So that's the problem a lot of parents have. What do you do? Well, if you have 4 kids, you have to have 4 computers, or what do you do? That's another problem.
It's impossible. I mean, I have several friends that have more than 4. I have a friend who has 5 children, so it's very difficult, and it's very difficult doing different levels. And if you have to go to work, it's even much more, much more difficult situation that you're faced with. So it's interesting. We signed up for one thing in our school taxes, that we would have it 5 days a week. And I understand that everybody is waiting for a vaccine. You know, and so I think what the option would be now, if you heard this, I'm not sure, but in Florida, today they state mandated that all the children will return to school. I think they return the end of August, that they'll be returning to school in Florida.
So it's going to happen in Florida.
Yes, it's going to happen in Florida. That decision was made today, and it was state mandated. So I think some of the options, because I know there are parents who don't feel the same way. Some parents are more concerned about the virus. They're more concerned about their children being ill, and I respect that. So I think what they should do as an option, like they did in Colorado, they're giving an option to the parents. If you like your child to return to school, that you may sign a waiver. You know, this way, not to hold the school, you know, God forbid your child was to get sick, which I can't understand that at all, because, you know, they've gotten the flu and you don't hold anybody accountable. It happens.
No, but what about this, Ann Marie? What about a situation where you have, let's say, a 15-year-old kid? Now, granted, they're low risk, but they can carry that to, let's say, home, and let's say they live with their 90-year-old grandmother. Is that's something that could be a concern to many parents?
Right. No, I do hear what you're saying, but they did say in the American Academy of Pediatricians that the children, the adolescents also have been placed they were first at a higher risk of morbidity and mortality for physical and sexual abuse and substance abuse and stuff like that, keeping them home. But they also had stated that the children were not, you know, the human petri dish that they once thought. So I think there's some conflict out there whether they actually can bring it home to, you know, their grandmother or grandfather and contaminate them with the virus, or infect them with the virus.
That's an important question, because if it is low risk, you understand that. If we found out tomorrow, and things are always changing, remember, wear the mask, don't wear the mask. What if tomorrow we woke up and they said, now, kids can be carriers? That might change it. And if you do have a 90-year-old grandmother at home, maybe that parent opts for the distance learning, but other kids should be allowed to go back. You know, it's a balancing test.
Right, exactly.
Right. It's a balancing test.
Right, it is a balance. So, and I agree with you 100%. So, like what I was saying in Colorado, what they did is that say you do have elderly parents living with you, the grandparents, and you're very concerned about this, give them the option for the parents that they could homeschool them, and, you know, give them a homeschool option. For the parents who are not as concerned, or they want their kids to return 5 days a week to the school environment, let them sign a waiver so that they can return.
And you made a good point.
I think they should give that option.
I agree. I think you made a good point, because there are other things that are problematic for children. Like you said, alcohol abuse in the home, drug abuse, domestic violence in the home, potential suicides, kids that need, let's say, to have that interaction. So you can't just look at it from a medical standpoint. You have to look at the other side as well. And I think that's where sometimes our elected officials fail us. They're like, well, health is the only thing. Well, mental health is also important. I did a show where we talked about the suicide rate had gone up. Or you have a 14 or 15-year-old kid that's maybe autistic that needs to have that interaction. And they're sitting at home, and maybe they have one parent there who's preoccupied doing something else. That kid has no social interaction. That could be a worse problem than the kid maybe dealing with COVID-19. You don't want anybody to get it, but that might be like a cold if a kid gets a COVID-19, as opposed to, you know, something worse happening to that kid. And suicides are up. There's no doubt about that.
Right. So I think that's why I think they should give an option. I think that maybe whatever the parents don't feel comfortable, then they could have the option to, you know, like maybe there would be a homeschool packet, like you follow these processes, just like other parents who currently are homeschooling their children today, because many have already done this process, right?
And that could
help.
So
give them that option.
And that could help, because let's say it's a class of 30 and 10 kids opt for home distance learning. So now the class is less crowded. So that's also a good thing, because you don't have 30 people in there with 1 or 2 teachers. So that's good. Listen, I got to wrap things up. I got another guest in the waiting area. So I want to thank you for calling. I'm going to be in touch with you. Let's touch base mid-July, or maybe a little later than that, after we find out some more information, and we can then better assess where we're going. Really, thank you, Ann Marie.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for allowing me to express my concern. And again, you know, we have to do something that would balance both the way everybody feels. I know there's not one paintbrush that can just do
Right.
one stroke, and that would be,
Yeah, one
you know,
size
your
does
whole
not fit
entire
all.
artwork.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night. I have my producer getting Ed Vilbig on. The next topic is an important topic. It has to do with Governor Kemp, Brian Kemp in Georgia, and called in the National Guard and declared an emergency. And Atlanta is in very bad shape. There's been a lot of murders, a lot of shootings. An 8-year-old girl died recently. And it's not just Atlanta. It's happened in Chicago. You can't pick up the paper and not read about the deadly weekend that just happened in Chicago. New York, which hadn't been like that, is turning into a Chicago. And that's not a compliment. A lot of people are being shot. A lot of people are being killed. There was I think it was in New York City, where a man was walking with his 6-year-old daughter, had her by the hand, he's crossing the street, and all of a sudden a car pulls up, you see a hand reach out with a gun, shoots him and kills him. I think we have Ed Vilbig on the line. Ed?
Yes, hello from Atlanta, Georgia. I just want to tell you about how bad it is down here. Between Friday and Sunday in Atlanta, there were 11 different shootings, 31 victims, 5 of whom were killed.
Wow, that's shocking.
So you were talking about New York. It's bad all over in these major cities. And we need some action. And I'm so glad our governor decided to call in the National Guard. 1,000 troops were called up to try to get some order in Atlanta.
And now,
I just want to say for our audience, I just want to say that I am 2 miles, because there's so much fake news out there. I just want to clarify. I am 2 miles from the Atlanta border. I live in Mableton, Georgia, which is 2 miles from the city of Atlanta, just to clarify that, because I was told that I was portraying false information because I don't live in Atlanta.
But you live nearby. Now, you're an educator.
2 miles.
You're an educator, and you just said yourself, Atlanta's your backyard, but do you work in Atlanta? Or you work on the outskirts?
Yes.
Okay, so you work in Atlanta,
Yes,
you
I work in
live
Atlanta.
just outside of Atlanta. And
2 miles.
2 miles. Now, the area where you work, are you seeing any of what is going on?
Yes. The problem is that you have a lot of people they don't value education. When I'm in school, they don't want to do what the teachers tell them to do. And the attendance is a problem. Their conduct is a problem. Now, we haven't been in school since March 13th, but I'm hoping when we go back, things are going to be a little different. But with all the protesting going on, I don't know how it's going to be.
Right.
And the numbers here in Georgia are starting to skyrocket in terms of COVID. So I don't know what the plans are. Every county here does their own thing.
Right.
There's
But-
not a national, there's not a statewide mandate. I'm going back on July 26th, I think, but that could be August.
Now, Ed, what do you think is fueling the violence? Like, I know in Chicago, they talk about gang violence and drugs.
Well, that's an easy, you know what it is. It's just when you send a message bashing the police, you want to defund the police, and it's happening all over the country. There's a movement to defund the police, to take away their power. So now I was reading an article about Black Lives Matter, and I do support police reform. I think it's needed, but I think it's going too far. I mean, they want to close prisons down, and basically, you're not going to convict anybody of a crime. Is that what we're coming to? So now people are empowered to do whatever they want. Especially in New York, you basically opened up your jails with the excuse of, COVID. So you let everybody out. And same thing down here. It's just the cops. When the mayor gets on TV all the time bashing on Good Morning America, bashing the cops, and then now she's upset because the National Guard was called in. Because as I read the statistics before, Atlanta's not a safe place. I was safer when I went to Cuba 2 years ago.
Wow.
Well, I felt safer walking the streets than walking the streets of downtown Atlanta.
Let me ask you this. Now, we know that Chicago has been very dangerous for years. New York is going that direction. Before the murder, and I'll call it the murder, I'm going to say it, the murder of George Floyd. Now, I'm not talking about the one at the Wendy's in Atlanta. I'm talking about George Floyd. Before that murder, was Atlanta experiencing anything like it is now?
You always had to mind your P's and Q's when you were walking around Atlanta. It was never like a real safe place. But now it's real bad. There is a noticeable difference walking around Atlanta than there was before the protest began.
Right. So the protest brought on a level of violence. Now, we talk protests. Obviously, there's peaceful protests, and then there are riots. What have you been, and last time when you were on my show, you said there was a lot of peaceful protests in Atlanta, and that's fine. People are allowed to do that. It's guaranteed by the First Amendment. But what has really changed that made Atlanta more dangerous? You said the protest, but what is it? The people that are doing the shooting, they are more emboldened? Is that it?
You hit it right on the head. You're exactly right. When you have people that are completely, when you watch the news and police officers are calling in sick, they don't want to go to work. Every politician gets up there and bashes the police. Then you have a movement that doesn't want to police people. You want them to, commit a crime, and it's okay. And that's what I don't understand. I don't care what color you are. You commit a crime, you need to have a consequence. But I'm getting the feeling now. It's like, well, if you're black and you commit a crime, it's okay because we've been oppressed, and in the history of this country, as we all know, isn't perfect. But that's not an excuse to go riot and loot. But Atlanta is unsafe, and they need to do. And I'm so glad our governor called up the national troops, and I don't care if the mayor's upset about it. It's a Democrat-controlled city, and it's unsafe, and the National Guard is here, and that's
right.
what needed to be done.
Let's be clear. Now, Governor Kemp, Brian Kemp, is a Republican. Now, the mayor of Atlanta, now she's in the running, if I'm not mistaken, for Biden's VP pick. You've been hearing that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, she also has COVID-19, I'm told. She tested.
Well, yeah, she's tested positive, but she was told that she can either go up or down, and she decided to, err on the side of caution.
Okay.
But if Governor Kemp gave everybody $100,000, that wouldn't be good enough for her. So no matter what he does, and it's amazing how she gets on all the talk shows. I mean, all your television stations, she shows up, and her city's a mess. That's what I don't get. I don't understand how the Democrats are controlled by the media. It doesn't make sense to me.
Now, let me ask you a question. This is a very important question. Do you think Atlanta is experiencing the blue flu? You know what I'm talking about, where cops are concerned that if they go in and make an arrest and something goes wrong, they're going to be charged. They'll be looking at life in prison. Are they pulling back the police?
Of course. Yeah, I would if I was a police officer. Would you put your neck on the line for people that don't support you? And what's interesting, I don't know if you haven't heard about this, but there was a protest by Black Lives Matter or an affiliated group that supports them at Stone Mountain Park, and the protesters had guns.
I saw that. Yes,
rifles and stuff.
And they were going up to cars.
Why is that allowed? That makes no sense to me. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. You should be against people protesting that have guns. That is totally uncalled, and I can't believe they got away with it. But I could see, what I'm thinking is that Georgia, because Stone Mountain's right, is about 15 minutes outside of Atlanta, if not a little longer, maybe 20 minutes, 15 miles out of Atlanta. I'm thinking that Georgia didn't want the heat of having, real massive protests because they shut down this Black Lives Matter protest. That's maybe what they were looking for. Deliberately bring the guns out, and then if the National Guard moves in or the police, then you have we're trying to stop peaceful protests.
Right. Now,
I think that's crazy.
Right. Now there had been a lot of violence around that Wendy's that burned down, correct?
Yes. An 8-year-old girl was shot there. That I told you on our show when I was on last time that I used to work down there. That area is unsafe during the day, and I never even liked going down there. But that was the neighborhood that I serviced when I worked in testing in Atlanta Public Schools. That area is bad, and to burn stuff down again doesn't make any sense to me. But I'm not surprised when I heard about the 8-year-old because that area is unsafe. And when you have about 3 weeks ago, after I came back from New York, you had some kids that decided they were going to police the streets alone, and they're walking around with guns, saying that they are the police.
Right.
I don't understand why this is allowed, but I as I said again, I applaud Governor Kemp for trying to take a stand on this because it just doesn't make sense to me.
Now, how do you think
what's the end game here? So if you commit a crime, there's no consequences. We're going to do away with the prison, the criminal justice system. There has to be law and order in the country. Now, do we need reforms? Yes. I said it multiple times about legalizing drugs, and there's different ways to have to have consequences. But if you call 911, I don't know if you've seen the commercial up there with I get paid for by Trump, where it's basically it's attacking Joe Biden, and it's a great commercial because it's so true. If you're going to defund the police, and when you call 911 and no one answers,
there are consequences.
Press 1. Right. Press 1 if you've been robbed. Press 2 if we'll get back to you in 5 days, and it's an excellent commercial. Right. I don't think people are thinking about the ramifications of defunding the police. Right. That doesn't make any sense to me.
No, but what do you think? How do you think Governor Kemp is going to use the National Guard? I heard that they're going to man a post somewhere, and the police can then do the policing that they really should be doing rather than crowd control. What have you been hearing as to how Governor Kemp is going to use the National Guard?
I've heard, you hear different pieces. What I've heard so far is that it's basically going to be used to protect your monuments and to protect the federal court building, build important buildings around Atlanta, and then they'll assist the police as needed. That's what I've been told. Now, I saw, an editorial where they show, a tank rolling down, Peachtree Street in Atlanta. That's not what this is about. But the left, is over dramatic, and I think the left they're getting nervous here because this could be a test case for the United States, for the rest of the country. Maybe the National Guard will be coming out in Chicago, in New York. If the local police cannot do their job and it's unsafe, as Atlanta is unsafe, then federal authorities are going to have to move in. If Chicago is safe, you wouldn't need the police to come in. And I'm amazed how these cities, especially Chicago, I was watching the mayor of Chicago, it's always blaming somebody else. Trump is not, how do you blame the Republicans when it's a Democrat-controlled city? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Right, but if
I lived in Chicago, I'd want action.
Right. Now let me ask you this, it's very important. How loud is the defund the police movement in Atlanta?
Well, Black Lives Matter is here, and they're calling for, I was reading some of their platform. It's 150 organizations put together, and they want laws passed in Congress. They want federal prisons closed down. Right. I don't understand.
They also want to get rid of qualified immunity.
They basically want prisons cut down, shut down. These 150 groups are basically asking for a lot. I don't think it's going to go through Congress, and some of these laws that they want some bills that they want, put through Congress, that needs to be exposed. I want this to be out. Get their word out. But the media will spin it where they're trying to do good things, but closing prisons and doing stuff like that really could end up hurting people makes no sense to me. They want to do away with immigration. I mean, just complete. I think Black Lives Matter is for basically anarchy. Now, I'm all for it. As I said, we do need police reform. We need to make it where they can police and not have to worry about some of the things that they have to deal with.
Right. Now, let me get a little political, Ed. Is Georgia a reliable red state?
No, it's not. That's a very good point. There's a chance that this could really flip. You have so many people from New York moving down here. Atlanta has become so big. When I got down here, it was like 5 million people. And we're well over 6 million now, and that's not including the suburbs.
Up to New York.
We're a big state, and if that continues, and we can continue to get more and more, Atlanta continues to grow. I mean, the real estate values in Atlanta are just skyrocketing because so many people are looking for houses and places to live.
I got a question. And, is Atlanta? I know Atlanta has less people than New York City, the 5 boroughs. Geographically. Right. Compare Atlanta geographically to New York City.
Okay, basically Atlanta is Nassau County put together, Nassau, Suffolk, New Jersey, Connecticut. They just put all these counties together and lump it as Atlanta. There is no county of Atlanta. Atlanta is a combination of 12 counties: DeKalb, Fulton, Gwinnett, Clayton, Henry County, Cobb County, where I live. all those counties make up what is Atlanta. So Atlanta, they just keep annexing counties and calling it Atlanta.
But how big is it? How sprawling is Atlanta compared to New York?
Atlanta is about 100 miles from one end to the other, from one county to the bottom of the other county that's considered Atlanta. It's about 100 miles. Mm-hmm. So the geographical distance is the same as, from Montauk all the way basically to New York City.
Oh, that's big.
Yeah, it is. But like you have Nassau and Suffolk, that's 4 million people there. That would be that's comparable to 12 counties here. When I used to go to work in the morning, I lived in Douglas County, which is another county of Atlanta. As I said, there's 12. I used to go through Douglas, Cobb, and I worked in Fulton. That was 3 counties, and I only lived maybe 12 miles from where I worked.
Right. Now,
So
now Atlanta, where do the Falcons play? I know it's Atlanta Falcons, but where do they play? What county?
Fulton County.
And the Braves, is it the same stadium?
No, the Braves play. They moved from the area where that girl was shot, very close to there. They moved up to Cobb County, where it's basically the suburbs of Atlanta, which is a little safer, different demographics, and the Falcons. I mean, the Braves saw it was coming. That area was never. That area never turned around and became a pleasant place to live.
I see.
Where the Braves were.
Now, once they start playing,
I mean, you had
maybe not this season, but once they start playing, how does crime affect those areas? Like they still fill the stadiums, don't they?
Well, yeah. What's interesting though is like the Braves, when they were down there, I thought they were going to, the part of the plan was to, renovate that area and, pump money into it and make it a good place to live. It's the same thing where the Falcons are. The Falcons have a beautiful stadium, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, $1.5 billion. Awesome stadium. It's unbelievable. I've been there twice.
And they have a Chick-fil-A,
and
right?
the area around it, that's where the Falcons play. The area around it is not really good. Someplace you don't want to be at night. And I thought Arthur Blank was supposed to put in all this money to fix up the area around the stadium. It's the same thing like Atlantic City.
I was going to say,
Atlantic City was supposed to, they figured
The
all those
gentrifying.
casinos would basically change the area around it, and that never happened. It's the same thing with the Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
Right. Now they have a Chick-fil-A, the Falcon Stadium, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But it's not open on a Sunday.
That when the NFL plays, but they make so much money. Their restaurants here are just always packed.
But the one in the
very
stadium?
Popular. The one not that that one when there's on a different event, but on Sundays they close. That's a company rule. Every Chick-fil-A in Georgia is closed.
Sundays.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I said that's when football is played. Unless you have a Monday night game there, it's usually Sunday. Once in a while Saturday. But so you have a Chick-fil-A in a stadium that's predominantly for football that plays on Sundays, but they're not open on Sundays.
It's close. But don't forget, you have the soccer team. You have a lot of events.
Okay.
I mean, it's a beautiful stadium. There's a lot going on. But I passed it. It was shut down. I'm saying to myself, wow, the amount of money they could be making. But remember, too, football. You have Thursday night games. You got when you get down to December, you start getting into Saturday games. The Mercedes-Benz has all kinds of college events. So Chick-fil-A is making money. And don't forget, when there's no games there, it's just closed. There's no employees there. You don't have any food in there. So they're not really losing anything.
Right.
The only thing they have to pay
Lost
for
opportunity.
is the rent.
Now, let me ask you this question. What is the relationship between the police commissioner in Atlanta and the mayor of Atlanta? Like I know in New York City, the police turned their back on de Blasio.
That's a trick question. See, that's a trick question.
Why is that?
Someone had to take the fall when that with the incident that happened in Atlanta, that with what was his name, Brooks, Rashad Brooks.
Right.
Someone had to take the fall because of course the white police commissioner resigned. It was her fault.
Right.
So she decided to resign, and so now we have a new police commissioner who's been pretty quiet. I would have thought they would came out with a statement about the National Guard being sent up. And no, the mayor had stepped in. It took that, has been doing all the press releases on that. So, I always wanted to live in Atlanta up until a few months ago. My address was Atlanta. I moved. Now it's going to come to the point, I think, where people are not going to want to live in Fulton County. You're going to want to live in other counties. You're not going to want to be downtown or midtown, or you're just going to want to live outside of the city.
Let me ask you this one. Now, I know that de Blasio was not a very popular mayor right about now.
Well, did he reelected?
He did get reelected, that's for sure. Thank God he can't
that's
run right away.
that-
But what about the mayor of Atlanta? Does she enjoy some popularity?
Within the black community, yes, and I would assume a lot of whites that do support her, white liberals. But I'm not a fan. It's just it seems to me she's more interested in being on Good Morning America than doing right for the city of Atlanta.
Is she in a second term or first term?
I'm sorry. What was that?
Is she in a first term or a second term?
Oh, first term. It was real close. That was a very close election. It was basically a black Democrat. Female against a white female Republican.
So she hasn't run for election. She hasn't run for re-election yet.
No, and she'll probably win, but I'm not so sure of that. I think everything's going to be fair game with elections now, because I think when she's on Good Morning America all the time, and you have a crime problem, that doesn't. I think blacks are going to turn around and say, you know what, maybe we need to look at a different candidate.
That's a possibility.
And there's also I hear a lot about corruption in their administration, but I'm not going to talk about that. I don't have the facts.
Right.
I don't want to speculate, but I do hear that it's just as bad as the previous administration.
Right. Now in Atlanta, in that neck of the woods, right? They have the police commissioner is white or black right now.
I'm not sure who the replacement is. I don't know if she's named a permanent replacement. But the mayor is basically doing all the press conferences.
What is it? And I'm
doing. It's probably an interim police interim. I mean, I'm sure they can't find someone that quick, so it's probably an interim police commissioner.
Mm-hmm. Now, Atlanta, as you said, is a big area. So you have wealthy suburbs of Atlanta. You have poorer suburbs, kind of like New York City. You have the Upper East Side, and then you have poor.
Like if you lived in Atlanta, you'd be living in one of the rich suburbs. I live in a middle class neighborhood.
I tried to live in a nice neighborhood if I could. Doesn't matter to me, white, black, green. I just want to live in a nice neighborhood.
You would be in the the $10 million man.
Oh yeah,
I could see you living in there.
Yeah, I'd have to get a tax credit to do that. But now, what do you think? Look, you're a New Yorker, Ed. You grew up in New York. We went to college in New York.
Yes.
You worked in New York.
And I'm proud of that. Remember where we stood during the Civil War.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people. Everybody's so pro-South down here. You can't tell me what to do. Like, you can't wear masks. You can't do. Nobody can tell me what. But they're so proud of Southern heritage. But meanwhile, where the South was during the Civil War, and taking down a flag does not make up for what was done for hundreds of years.
Right. Well, I always say this. Look, tearing down statues. And look, I can sympathize. I understand that. Maybe not Washington, Jefferson, or Lincoln. That doesn't make any sense to me. But Confederate. But is it really going to make a difference? You just made a comment and said, look, taking down the flag. I know it offends some people, the Southern flag. But is it really going to make a difference in these people's lives? And why, during the 8 years of the Obama administration, why was it not really that big an issue? I'm sure people were offended, but you didn't see statues being torn down to that extent.
Yeah. Down here, it's always been, when I was an assistant principal, I had some students that were wearing the Confederate flag. So it's always been contentious down here in the South. But what I don't understand, if it's offensive, if there's a statue that's offensive, you bring it to the city council, you have a debate upon it. You don't take it upon yourself to just take that statue. You just don't take that statue down. And if let's say, like I know in Richmond, they took down some statues all around the country. If the community wants to take it down, move the statue. It's part of history. Just don't destroy it. And there's one case where a statue injured some of the protesters. That's what happens when you. I have no sympathy for that. You took the statue down, it fell on you. Well, I'm sorry. You should have thought about that before you did something that was illegal. And I completely support. Keep making sure that our monuments and our statues are not torn down in this country.
And I thought it was ridiculous when you hear about Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson. Now, I understand Washington and Jefferson owned slaves, right? But again, you judge a person by the times they lived in and what they
Yes.
did for this country. Again, if you didn't have Jefferson and Washington, you wouldn't have America. Certainly
But
wouldn't
what
be
about
like
tearing down Frederick Douglass? That just shows me you don't know history. If you
that.
tear
That
down
doesn't make any sense to me.
Frederick Douglass,
Right. Or even let's say Grant, he won the Civil War for the North, and that allowed us to win, and therefore the 13th Amendment came about because we were winning the war. If we were losing the war or getting our butts kicked, that 13th Amendment wouldn't have gone through. And even if it did, the South would have kept their slaves. So I guess BLM doesn't really, they're not a student of history when they start attacking
No.
the fundamentals of America.
I think BLM right now is starting to push too far. And I know Trump is down 14 points in the polls, if not a little more. I saw one poll that said 17 points. If you continue to push and the Republicans air commercials like they did about the defunding the police with Joe Biden, you might see this election become real close. I can't predict a winner at this point, especially now with COVID going up. Now all of a sudden the blame game starts. I would really like to see politicians work together, just like Clinton did with Newt Gingrich back in the 90s. I don't see a reason why Chuck Schumer can't work with Trump and try to get this pandemic knocked out.
This is the way,
it's getting bad down here in the South.
This is the way I see
I
it.
just don't.
I may be a partisan, but I really think that Pelosi and Schumer would not want to work with Trump, because if they work with Trump and let's say he has some success on a bipartisan issue, they're not going to like that because Trump then will tout that working relationship and will help him get elected. They don't want to, just like remember when the DACA kids,
All right,
he said he was going to give them 800,000 or a million, and they said no.
All right. According to your philosophy, I see what you're saying. So let's say Joe Biden wins. We get up that Wednesday morning and Joe Biden's the
God
winner.
forbid.
Does that mean Black Lives Matter goes away?
No.
Is that the end of that?
Oh, no.
Does that mean MSNBC? Now, what happens to MSNBC? What happens to CNN? What's the narrative now?
I don't know. But they're not going anywhere.
Are people that are poor now under Trump that are beside themselves that are protesting? Are they going to be happy on? Is that going to change their life on Wednesday, November 4th?
The answer is no, unless they change their own lives, Ed. I've said this many times. There has to be fundamental
this is the feeling
changes.
I'm getting. I have some of my students I taught in New York City. Two of my students are actively engaged, and one of them is just a protest. The other student texted me, and he likes to riot and go out and destroy things. And I said to him, please don't get killed or get arrested. And I said to him, are you going to be? How is the day after if Biden wins? How is that going to affect your life? I don't know.
Right. Listen, Ed,
people are not thinking further down. That doesn't make sense to me.
Ed, listen, we got to run. I'm running out of time. I'm looking at my clock. I want to thank you for calling in. I'm going to get you back on in the next week or the week after to talk about another topic or to follow up to see how things are going with what the National Guard was called to do. But you have a great day. Thanks for calling in.
You're welcome. Thank you.
In the few seconds we have left, I want to promote my book. I want to talk about Divorce: A Practical Guide. It's a great read. Gives you a lot of information. In fact, I gave the book out to 2 clients today. I told them there's going to be a quiz at the end of it. Just kidding about that. But it's a good source of information. If you're looking to get a divorce or you're considering a divorce, it gives you the information you need to be a better consumer when you go see an attorney. I want to thank you for watching Finding Common Ground here on Altice Channel 115, 10 o'clock Saturday mornings. Tune in next week. Thank you.